Hi everyone. Today I will be going through how to draw sections and plans of your models that we've created thus far. So to start, I'd like to look at a project from last semester, a student who included some process work. Um, when you're in this phase, I think it's important to assess, the trajectory of your design following the discussions with your studio professors. And so as you select your iteration, keep in mind that you're not the idea is not to represent what you've modeled one to one, but through the process of drawing and plan and section to further the design that you've created. So we're going to be working off of this for my tutorial. And when you're in this position, what you want to do is identify the sort of spaces that you've created, and you're going to loosely estimate and measure them into the drafted space. So, you can imagine if I have this model physically, I can, assess that, okay, I have, a sort of stacked spaces right here, and I will really be concerned with the sort of like the length of these spaces, and this isn't to scale, but we'll pretend, the length of these spaces and the depth of these spaces. And, if your model is more sectional, you might be considered with the height of these spaces. And so let's talk about how to assess whether your design is lending to a sectional approach or a plan approach. So I've sort of estimated this from that model, and I've created a footprint in the plan and a sort of stacked volume in the section. Uh, so knowing this student and knowing this project, I understand that this is a very sectional model, and that's how we're going to be developing this. I think it's important for us to realize that these drawings do not exist in a vacuum. We're going to create one or the other, depending on how you feel best supports your design intent, and then you'll use that to project and inform your second drawing. So here, I've started to stack this, and if we look at it in plan, I think we can both agree, like which one is giving more information about the quality of space that we're trying to create. The plan helps us locate the project, but we're not really understanding the quality of space within it. And since this is a project that like really anchors and carves itself into the site, we will be starting with a section. But looking at what might lend to a plan approach, if your project is maybe like a series of smaller structures and you're really concerned with how you'll navigate between them. So maybe they sort of scatter down the hill like this. Um, you know, this might be a reason to approach your project through plan. If the sort of circulatory nature of your project is like what you really want to focus on. Maybe you're like interested in like these sort of negative spaces that like the location of your structures creates. That will be a reason to start with the plan. But we're going to look at how to draw both of them equally, and it doesn't really make a huge difference where you decide to start. And so before I get started with working in Rhino, I did want to address this sort of the thought that some students might be having, why aren't we just modeling this in 3D? And part of that is when you're drafting in a sort of two-dimensional space, you're allowed to explore the relationships much more than when you have to resolve the geometry in 3 dimensions. So this is, there's sort of less constraints on you when you're working in 2 dimensions. And I would encourage everyone to use it as a way of progression, not representation. And when you're working between the two as well, you don't really need to fully reconcile how these things are working. That's what the rest of the semester is for, and this is still like just a early exploration of that. So don't constrain yourself by feeling the need to reconcile the three-dimensional relationships of what we're drawing here. All right, so as we start drawing, you'll notice that I'm working in Rhino. I am working in the top view. I think if you're doing any substantial 2D drafting, it makes sense to just work in a 2D view. There's not much to be gained from working in a 3D view. You just risk sloppier modeling. And before I get started, I do want to touch on the layer setup. So this is how I set up all of my files, and I've been doing it for probably, I don't know, 5 years now, in this exact way, where I'm able to filter imported information, 3D information, and 2D information. Each one has sublayers. And in the sublayers, I have a bunch of stuff that I want to be able to filter information out, but I think the most important ones are going to be these three right here, highlighted in blue. So this is going to relate to the hierarchy of line weights, and as we start to draw more, you'll see the significance of these three layers. Everything else could realistically fall into these three layers, but I've separated them for my sanity. I would encourage everyone to keep their layers as organized as possible in Rhino, because once you get into Illustrator, it's a little hard to separate that information, and you have more control here. And as you're starting and you're creating it, it makes much more sense to filter it then than to do it all by hand after the fact. Also, during this video, you'll see that I have what are called aliases. So if I type like a letter in the command prompt, and you can see that up here in the top left, if I type a letter, it will just type in a command that I've associated with it. So I'll make all of these available to everyone. And if you're interested in using them, you can load them. It's just a text document. You can load them by going to this gear up here and clicking on aliases, and you just click import. You'll bring in the text document. It's very easy. If you're on a Mac, it'll look a little different. There is, I think it says Rhino in the top left. You'll click on where it says Rhino in the top left. It'll say preferences or something in this window. And then in that menu that pops up, there should be like a mustache and glasses, like disguise face, and you can plug in aliases there. Lastly, before we get started, units are going to be really integral to this. I am working in a file with inches, so I'm typing in inches, and if I have to do like a feet dimension, you'll see me type in the sort of dimension for feet. So like here, I would just say 10 feet. If I do 10 inches, it will move it not very far. Also with that, I have the display position set to feet in inches and 1/16 of an inch. So since we're working at an 1/8 inch scale, once you do scale things down, you'll want to understand like if something is 1/8 of an inch, because you could be off pretty radically once you're scaling stuff. So let's get started. Starting off, you might still be, grappling with how to work in scale in this environment. So I have a layer for my pages that I'm going to be using. Just starting off, we know that these have to be printed on 11 by 17s. So if we start with like a sheet like that, I have a little trick that I have used that is foolproof for scaling items up. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create an 1/8 inch line right here. So now we have what is 1/8 of an inch. It's a little dark. I'm going to brighten it. Yeah, there we go. So we have an 1/8 of an inch, and we know that in our scale that equals a foot. So if I create a 12-inch line here, we have our sort of scale. So if we do the scale command, we'll set our base point, and you can see everything that's happening in the command by reading the command prompt. We'll set our base point at the end of the 1/8 inch line, and our first reference point will be 1/8 of an inch away from it. And by now pressing tab, I've locked this dimension. So I can come all the way down to the 12-inch line. And if you look in the bottom left right here, you'll see that this line is now 12 inches. This will scale it the inverse of 1/8 of an inch. So it's been scaled up. So this is how you should set up your views. Everything that we're drawing will have to fit on this page to some regard. And you don't want to be scaling it up in Illustrator, because then you will lose the 1/8 inch quality to it. So I've loosely established my pages. We can get it. So as you start drafting, you'll likely start with something very loose and rough, just to locate on the site where you're operating. And the first thing that we need to assess is sort of the quality of material enclosure. So, we have these red boxes, but they're really not telling me anything about the envelope. I can understand scale because I have these nice cutouts of people down here, and I can see that I have a sort of large space here and then a sort of more compressed space. So what I'll start by doing is just drawing the floors of both of these. And so in this instance, they're carving into the site. And realistically, what this might look like is like a 4-inch slab on grade, and then some sort of like aggregate underneath it. For the sake of this studio, you can just keep it pretty simple. This is an 1/8 inch scale drawing. You don't need to show me every nut and bolt that's going to be on the page. So for now, I'm going to keep everything pretty simple. This is just going to be a 12-inch floor. Now, if you are, say maybe your structure is like up here and you're sort of floating, you might consider thickening it. Think about materiality. Something that is framed out of like lumber might look a lot lighter than something that's cast out of concrete. So we'll keep our 12-inch floors, and I'm going to copy one up here. So now I have 2 floors, and the walls that we have in this location and in this location are going to be a bit different than the walls that we have, sort of facing the exterior of the shell. because these are gonna be considered like retaining walls. So they'll be a little bit heavier than the walls that we're, meeting the elements with. So for these ones, I would actually say they might be something like 16 inches, because we're considering now that we have concrete, and then we would have, some sort of interior finish on the wall. So I will just select all these, and using the trim command, I can extend them to each other by holding shift. And I missed one, so we'll get that. And now we have this outline. One other thing that you'll notice now is that as we have this outline, we can see that this topography line in the background is sort of intruding in our sight. So we're going to be cutting that out so that we just have a nice, clean interior wall. Now, this is where we can begin to use some of the lighter line weights. So, perhaps I would like to show a staircase that descends from this space here. And so this would be 36 inches, and I can array it downwards. We'll say we need 20 of them. And then I will set the spacing. Most of the stairs that we're going to be drawing here should be 7-inch risers. So they should be 7-inch tall between treads. You can do, ones that are larger or deeper, if you have like a monolithic staircase that you really want to design. In the inverse section, so say, we're cutting it here and we're looking like to the left of it, it would look something like this. So this is where you can see we have an 11-inch tread depth and a 7-inch tread height. And the minimum of all these should be 3 feet in width. So that will also relate to the depth of a landing. So you have a switchback stair like this. This landing needs to be at least 3 feet deep. There's no negotiating it. And then in plan, that would be 6 feet across. So we have some stairs here, and I'm drawing them on the background layer. Things should look somewhat complete, and I'm going to go a bit above and beyond in detail here. So I'm going to offset this 1.5 inches to allude to a railing, and then I will bring this up 42 inches. Whoops. I'm working in feet. 32 inches. So now we can sort of see like what a railing might look like. And then on that furthest back layer, I can bring a railing down. So just by like creating, some groups of lines, I'm already informing how the space is being circulated. And that's really the goal here, is using some, relatively sparse at this level line weight to communicate your design intent. Okay, so now we'll move on to the building envelope as opposed to these sort of slabs and retaining walls that we've created. So the nature of the facade here is going to be radically different to this right here, because these walls are holding back earth, and this wall is either holding back the environment or it's granting views. So say we would like to draw a wall that is like masonry clad. So maybe we have like bricks on this wall. That would be somewhere close in terms of thickness. So we would know that it'd be about 12 inches deep. It has like a sort of cladding to it. Maybe it's like wood slats or a sort of shingle. Maybe it's like a larger format panel, like concrete or metal. Like that we can all agree is going to be about 1 foot in depth. Maybe you'll have interior walls that are about 6 inches in depth. So say I have like a wall here that's splitting this gallery and is creating like interior circulation as opposed to like one large room. This I can say is about 6 inches. And so when we are using wall thicknesses, we can really communicate a lot of information about the quality of space and the quality of enclosure. So with this wall now that I've created, I'm going to cut a window into it. And it's important that when we're drawing this, we think about it in both plan and section. So let's say that this is our wall and we're missing a roof, but we'll get there. Say we are cutting a hole in this wall. I'll be drawing it in both plan and section, just to show how these two elements relate. So say we start it in plan, and we know that in plan and section, this will be the same thickness. There should be that level of parity within your drawings. So maybe our window will be a 3-foot wide window, and I can create one really quickly, opening in the wall really quickly just by offsetting a line 18 inches in either direction. And now what I can do is I can split this rectangle, and that'll give me 2 rectangles that I can create now, and that leaves me with these 2 lines in the middle. Now, the inclination might be to like, remove those lines, draw a window, and call that a day. There's my window. It looks the same in plan and section, and it's done. I think at 1/8 inch scale, we can achieve a greater level of detail. And at the very least, so if we have these lines here, we'll take them and we'll drop them onto a lower layer. We'll actually put that on the light layer because what's going to happen in the middle is, we'll have a piece of glass and there's a lot of direction you can go with how you orient it. Maybe it's like flush nearly with the facade. Maybe it's really sunken and you've created a deep opening. I'm going to just keep it right in the middle of the opening. And then at this scale, at the very least, we're gonna show that this glass has a sort of framing around it. And so this could be just like a 1 inch offset that we're creating on both sides. And if we go really detailed, and this is where 1/8 inch scale is maybe not going to be functioning the same, we can show that there is a sort of jam on the ends of it. And so now this would actually be cut through as well, these two rectangles. And so now this is a closer representation of what it might look like. So we have the poché. And the poché is showing us we have either like the head and sill or the jamb. So if this is in section, it'd be like the head of the window and the sill of the window. If it's in plan, it'll be the jambs of the window. And I'm just going to get rid of these lines on the top and bottom. Okay. And then we have the glass that we're cutting through. This will all be on the poché layer. So it'll be cut as like a really thick line. Then below that, we have the sort of bottom of the window. And if you're watching this video in a room that has a window, like look at your windows. I mean, if you're in studio, like look at the curtain wall. Um, there's much more happening there than just, a single line of glass that we're leaving there. So we're seeing the bottom now, like the sill of it, and in section that might be like the jamb in the background. And then we're seeing the wall below. So this wall could be like the exposed wall, or maybe it's like a sort of sill surface that you're creating. And so this section very simply will work almost directly in plan and section. What's going to change between them is potentially size. So this window might be 3 feet wide, but it could be a lot taller than 3 feet, unless you have square openings and you're keeping them all proportionate. I think it's okay that they're, not the same dimension in both ways. So this way we might create a very tall window that's very narrow in plan, and it's sort of like a vertical slice of view. Now, if we say make this one wider, so let me pull some more wall area out of here. We could make this window read as a very, and so what I'm doing here, by clicking and selecting elements, you can grab their control points, which is great for what I'm doing, where I'm just sliding them. And I just lost them, so we're going to select last. No, that didn't work. Just grab them again. So when you want to like just stretch things, it's really nice to just use the control points. You can also mess it up a lot by doing that, but if you're just using Gumball, you can stretch and scale things pretty easily. I think I messed it up again. So all that is to say, you can change the proportion of your openings, and when you're doing so, it should be deliberate. Think of the sort of qualities of openings in the architecture studio versus like some of the other buildings on campus, or even like your dorms. Like some buildings have very focused windows. They're very human scale. Like this is a pretty human scale window. It's a little tall, and a little wide, but it's starkly contrasted then by something that would be like the large sweeps of glass that we have in the studio. Now, say I did want to draw something like that, it would look more like this, where we can just extend these wall lines over pretty easily. But I would set a module of the glass. So, maybe I like 3 foot spacing. I could just copy this up now. And I'm creating something that, is a bit more indicative of like a curtain wall or storefront that we have in the studio. So these two openings now have very radically different qualities. And so in plan, this basically makes a lot of sense, but unless you want a bunch of squares on your facade, you might want to vary them. So moving on from openings, we should also talk about doors because they should be explicit. We should be able to see the difference between doors and windows in both section and plan. So a door in section might just be we'll say 8 feet openings here. Whoops, I have a habit of doing that. Say it's 8 feet. And so this is like a pretty large door. It's a very generous door. You can also have like a 7-foot door that's a little bit more intimate. So I bring that down by a foot. So now I have a door height that you're a bit more aware of. Um, and by doing the same thing I did over here, I can just split this now, and I can create an opening in the wall by putting these lines on the back layer. So now we have an opening. And as we get to having roofs in our project, it's important to be cognizant of the kind of roof that we are creating. So a lot of students have green roofs that would, in some way like continue the natural element of the site into the project. And maybe that's a green roof that you're accessing, or a green roof that is just aesthetic and it's helping with like rainwater. For the former, I think in most cases that's what we're going to be seeing is like an accessible green roof. The thickness should be pretty robust compared to just like a typical, maybe it's like a rafter system. Comparison between a green roof and a typical just like framed roof might look something like this, where you have a much larger sort of plenum above you. And so for this level, that's really what we're looking for, is a sense of tectonics between everything, things landing on the ground, especially. So in this case, our project is very anchored, but maybe we would create something that's very, very light and lofty. And when you're doing that, I'm going to touch on that really quick. What you'll need to consider though is how are you showing the stilts that it's sitting on. Perhaps maybe it's sitting on stilts, or there's like a bridge that erupts from it. It could be like a tower. Like, how are you showing these supports? Because if I show them like this, then they actually read more like walls than like something that's light and structural. So if you want to show like your building being like lifted off the ground with stilts or with legs, you should be putting that on a background layer. It should not be on the same poche layer, because what's going to happen is that's going to look more like an enclosed space than like a light skeleton that's supporting your structure. And lastly, on the topic of floors and roofs and material thickness, if you are choosing to cantilever something here, we're transitioning from like something that's sitting on the ground and it's just like on the sort of soil and earth below us, to something that's floating, and the quality of that floor now is actually going to change pretty radically. And so we can mark that transition with a wall. So we could build a sort of a foundation out here, and then once we reach that point, maybe the floor beyond there is a little thicker to allude to like the structure that's supporting a cantilever. Just bring all this back. Is staircases. So as we draw stairs, they're actually really important if we draw them correctly at communicating scale to. So a lot of students are going to be drawing them as switchbacks, which will look something like this. I'm going to rough it out as 3 rectangles. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that this dimension here needs to be 3 feet or 36 inches. So essentially, I've created like a 36-inch rectangle this way, and this way. And so what I can do then is I can populate it with treads. And of course, I should practice what I preach. This will all be on like a background layer, because we're not cutting through it. Especially in plan, we're not cutting through these stairs. We will be cutting through them as they sort of rise above the cut plane. So like say these stairs, maybe we are cutting a plan that's at this height, and we're looking at this plan down here. At some point, these stairs are going to go beyond that. So first, let's draw the stairs, and we'll put them on the correct layer. Say that they're in the midground. Set that to our active. And then to draw treads just really quickly, I know that this is going to be an 11-inch array. So I can say I need like 10 in the X direction, 1 in the Y direction, none in the Z. And I'm going to need them to be about 11 inches. I'll set my anchor point and just say 11. And it looks like I got that spot on. Nice. And so I'll have to pull this out just a little bit to get that last one in there. So we'll just pull this guy out. You can make the stairs wider. Maybe you have like a very important staircase and you're making it very wide, and it's like a much more inhabited space rather than like a circulatory one. Hey, we're cutting a section through this now. When you cut a section through stairs, when you cut a section at all, you should be deliberate on where you're cutting it. So I've cut it here. I'm looking at the stairs and I get a lot of rich information in the background. I'm looking at the stairs, I'm cutting through a doorway, I'm cutting through two windows. Like don't cut your building in, don't cut your section in a location that doesn't tell its story. So what up here is more or less like we're cutting through this tread here, and we're only cutting through one tread, because if we cut through both treads, it's gonna read like this stair is on top, and like whoever's in there, they're gonna like smash their head into it because the stair is on top. But when you put it on the background, you can actually read it as like a sort of layered drawing. If you're drawing stairs like this, I would encourage everyone, as you draw your treads, like I said, it's 11 inches by 7 inches. You can vary on that for the most case, and just to keep it like pretty informal. I would say first, to create like the depth of your stringer, I would just say like a foot. And mine's a little shallower than that, but like a foot is a good rule of thumb. And secondly, when you're drawing them, you should keep in mind that like we need some head height above them. So the minimum for that will be 80 inches. And we get into the plan, something that we're going to want to be considering is information that we are not seeing in our view. So it's very possible that students will have a skylight or some sort of like thing happening in the roof above us that's going to be important to like how you lay out the space below. And so to get into the plan, I've quickly just developed this plan to have some of the same characteristics as what I've drawn over here. A similar position where I started this, and I just had the floor and the walls that slopes over the ground. So plans, if you don't know, are typically cut at about 4 feet off of the sort of floor surface. We're going to be cutting through this sort of outdoor space, this wall that I've created here in like the covered walkway. We'll see the stairs and we'll see this edge in the floor. So what I need to do to match this now is I should carry the stairs over in plan. And so just if I select them, I can see that I've picked up 13 curves. So I know that there's about 13 treads. And so if I come over here now and I'll use, so I know that these stairs are 36 feet or 36 inches deep. And I know that I have a 36-inch landing at the top, so I can just copy that. If I do an array, I know that I have 13 treads. I really, I need 13 because it'll include the one that I have here. Number in Y direction, I just have one. And then for my spacing, it'll be 11 inches now because we're looking at it in the top projection. And if I grab this, it should say 13 curves, added to selection. And I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did in the section where I draw the outside of it, and I'm going to offset this. I think it's like 1.5 inches in the section. So now I have a railing that will carry across, and this railing actually would mark a transition, like right about here. We could split this railing, and then we could register it as a part of our floor plate. So these are all one. And then what we will also have, so this will now come up a layer. It'll get promoted to midground. We will also have a railing come across here because we don't want anyone falling. And I will close it at the end by using a fillet with the radius to 0. So if you press R, if you look in the command prompt, I'm gonna do that again. If you look in the command prompt, you'll see that a letter under each sort of prompt is underscored. And so the radius command is underscored with an R. So if I press R, I can change the radius. I don't have to come up here and click on it. And if I set it to 0, it'll actually just make a nice 90-degree corner. And then did in my plan is I extended these walls out. So now that these roofs and these walls will sort of be consistent in how they extend past the space, and maybe this floor even joins it. I'm seeing all this stuff in the background. So I want to see the edge of this wall, and I want to see the edge of this wall where it goes above the roof. So to do that, really simply, I can just draw them here and connect these points. This space here needs a window. And let's see how long this is. So I said that these panels are going to be about 3 feet. You can go a little larger for sure. I'm going to keep them at 3 feet, about 14 panels. So I can take this line here, that's the length of my space, and I know I need to fit 14 panels, so I can type divide, and I'll say 14, and it'll cut out 4 these mullions in my curtain wall. I'll bring one over here and I'll center it. I can set up an array now with these points as my guide, and it looks like it wants to be below it. So we will show in the midline weight. We could actually theoretically just draw this all the way across now. We don't need to break it with the mullions because we know that when we layer in Illustrator, these are actually going to be below it. Beyond my section here, there's like a hill that crests in a really interesting way. And I need to be cognizant of how that shapes and frames my building. So I've actually cut that back here. I wanted to show it here because it defines a sort of mid-ground of my site. You know, if we leave it like this, where it's just a single line, our site is like a slice. It's like a 2D slice. And the site itself has no depth to it. It's just like a blade. So when you show that background, you can understand the sort of horizon of the site and as it vanishes around like a bend or some other natural feature. And likewise in the plan, as I'm expanding my site, or my structure, I am removing the contour lines so that it's understood that this is no longer a part of the natural landscape, it's a part of the architectural landscape. And so one more thing that we need to communicate here is what's happening like sort of beyond this cutting plane. And I think in this case, a really critical moment would be this point because I'm using it as a compressive space so that as you descend, you're sort of almost like ducking underneath this roof slab that frames an opening above you. So I would like to communicate that, and I know that it is here, and this is a great time to use the hidden line layer that we set up. So this will be the lightest layer, but when we bring it into Illustrator, it will be dashed. So I'm not putting it over my railing, I'm going to keep it off of the railing and just pull it back here a little bit. And I can even match that over here. Notably, I've added some partial height walls inside the space. And so this is really just to communicate a method of like placing objects within the section that occupy that mid-ground with our scale figures. And added are these lines here. And so what this communicates is the vanishing of this diagonal wall. So if our section is about here, you know, we're cutting and we're seeing this wall. What we're also going to see is like this corner back here. So we can even like project it. So like, you know, this is all going to be seen by the you know, section camera, and it'll sort of happen beyond, and it'll actually look like it's going over the topography. We're understanding this sort of quality of envelope that the Poche would tell us, but we can also see how the space is being occupied and how it sort of descends into space. There's a way to hatch everything here, and it's pretty useful. It's not entirely dissimilar to what we'll have in Illustrator. The hatch command, we want to make sure we are on the Poche layer. I can begin to select regions of the hatch. You might get prompted with this pop-up window before you do that. Just make sure you're on boundary, and you probably want to make a solid hatch. Make the topography one hatch, and then we'll come in and we'll do the building enclosure. So that'll be our hatch regions there. When it comes to the plan, so our plans have a level of carving to them. And it's pretty easy to determine, like, you know, where is my plan cutting the topography? And I can use this wall as a really nice guide. So I know that this wall in some way is going to mark the point of us carving. So actually all these contours up here, we're going to be cutting through the topography there. So we'll do the same thing where we make that a separate hatch, and then we can come in and we can hatch our walls. Hatching these partial height walls because they're not intersecting our cut plane. We're not going to hatch the railing because we're not cutting through it. And so that's a really basic way to get the hatch started here. And now when we go to export, so we can use that method that I did to scale my boards up, the graphic way of drawing like an 1/8 inch line and 12-inch line. You can also, when you're exporting, we grab everything, turn my trees on. We can do it in the export dialog. So here I'm able to put in the model scale. And so this is where you'll say, you know, 1 foot in the model is equivalent to 1/8 of an inch in Illustrator. So now we are in Illustrator with our drawing, and the first thing we can do to make sure that this came out to scale is to edit our artboard into an 11 by 17. Begin to set up my line weights right now before I even put it on the artboard so I can actually see it. First, I want to organize them. They got kind of jostled in transit. So the Poche, and we will select Poche because everything is properly managed on the right layer. So we can just click this circle to grab the entire layer. And when we do that, we can say that the stroke of these will be, okay, so we actually have to contend now with the hatches. I'm actually, for the sake of now, I'm going to delete all my hatches, see that process as well. So if I grab Poche, I can give it the correct color. We're going to be using black lines. And for Poche, I'm actually going to make it, let's see, we'll make it 2.5. So if we go to midground, we can drop this down to 0.75. We'll keep that sort of light color of it so that we can read the difference. And then for light, we're going to pull the settings from midground and then lighten it even further, 0.25. And then for hidden, we're gonna do the same thing, 0.25, and we're gonna add a dashed line to it. So you can sort of see how my alignments are setting up here. So we'll actually pull that up just below Poche. So now we don't have to contend with the background information. And likewise, we can get into our Poche. I'm going to unlock everything. And so this is a workflow I've been using just because I don't like how Shape Builder has a tendency to merge objects. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to make a new layer, paste it all into that. First thing, we don't really need these trees. They won't really lend us anything in this exercise. And what we're going to do is select everything. So the reason I do this separately is because you're going to change the color and the strokes of these lines, and you don't really want to undo all the hard work you just did. And it's nice to have the fills in a separate layer. So with this, we can click and it'll create the shape of our topography after we've selected it. This is a shape builder tool. So whatever you've selected, and I'll do it again, and you can see that I turned the stroke off on this and it turned everything off. So whatever you've selected, it will make a shape of. So if I click, it'll create a shape and then I can drag it and merge shapes together. So we'll do one really quickly for those walls. So what I've been enjoying is to create like a white fill for anything that's almost like your interior space. Now what I'm going to leave are the staircase. I want to read as something else. I'm going to leave this window, but I will create an interior fill there. Okay. So now if we grab all of our hatches, so select same fill color, then we'll match the white fill. We'll just do it again, select same fill color. We now have everything that we'll need solid, and I'm just going to group that for the minute because I'd like to delete everything else. So we just have that. And we're going to turn off the stroke so it's just pure solid colors. And so if we turn our layers back on top of it, you can now see how the opacity behind it is starting to interact with the trees. And if we give this a slight color to it, really just like subtle gray, it'll make our scale figure start to stand out if we so desire. And then for the actual site Poche, I suggest, I'm gonna ungroup it now. I suggest this should be black, and you're free to distinguish between the site and the building, but you should be able to read it from like the site and the floor, which is why we're changing the color now. And so now we can place these on sheets. We'll use the page boundaries that we set up in Rhino as a sort of guide. So this first one, we'll pull down, and the trees are kind of spilling off the page, but that's completely okay. I'm even gonna make these trees a little lighter. Transparency to create some depth. So some can be lighter, some can be darker. Yeah. And likewise with the plan, we'll place this on the sheet. And now one thing I did not talk about was my contours. I do have them separated in 1 foot increments and 5 foot increments. Which the 5 foot increments just need to be darker. They should all be lighter. That might be too light. It's worth testing how that'll print, but it's nice to be able to read the sort of incremental scale of the site through like 5 feet and 1 feet. And as far as section goes, this is where you could start the collaging. I'd say this is as far as we need to push the drawn portion. Probably crop this tree out right here so my building's not getting cut by it, but otherwise it's good to go.